The process of moving these people home has picked up. Throughout Friday, 40 flights will head to Cairo alone. Britain, France and the United States are providing aircraft to help the evacuation. The UN says that the number of refugees crossing into Tunisia has actually dropped significantly because the border there is now manned by heavily armed pro-Gaddafi forces. So almost all of Libya's neighbours could end up dealing with fleeing workers. Some have now fled through Algeria, further down Libya's western frontier. And up to 100,000 people may try to cross into Niger in the coming months. That's according to the UN. At Egypt's frontier with Libya, hundreds of African refugees are stranded in a border no man's land. Some have been there for days. Here, the Egyptian authorities have tightened security, fearing that mercenaries hired by Gaddafi may try to flee to Egypt. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
Well, Cassandra Nelson is director of the aid group Mercy Corps and joins us now live from Benghazi. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. How much of a problem is there with things like the food supply in places like Benghazi and other areas, given that we've had more towns being attacked?
You know, at this point, the food supply in Benghazi is definitely adequate for the population. The challenges that we're looking at here are really escalating prices, such that the poor, more vulnerable people don't have the money to buy adequate food supplies in Benghazi. We are also getting reports in from villages outside Benghazi to the south, ones that have been more involved in the violence recently, that they have been having shortages and dwindling supplies of flour and other basic items. So there is concern, but at this point there are adequate foodstuffs. It's more price points that are a real issue right now.
So where is the food coming in from? I mean, there were suggestions that the flow from Tripoli had certainly stopped.
Yes, definitely. In Libya, the food supply traditionally has been very centralized out of Tripoli, and in eastern Libya, all of the towns that we have visited and assessed have said that they have not received any food supplies from Tripoli in over 2 weeks since the unrest began. The food is coming in a little bit, it's trickling in from Egypt, and also they have warehouses here that they have used historically to hold food in and distribute it to the populations throughout the country. So there are food supplies here, but those again are being tapped into quickly, and there is a concern that if hoarding begins, because people are very concerned about how long this crisis will be drawn out for, and if food will start coming into the region again. So if people start to hoard food, we're going to really see some challenges begin, again, particularly for the poor people who don't have the money and the income to hoard their own food.
So given all this insecurity, I presume that organisations like yours are trying to bring in more food, and how do you do that in the current climate?
Well, at this point, I mean, what Mercy Corps is looking at is we're actually looking at how we can work with the people here to mitigate any upcoming crisis if the situation is prolonged. So we're looking at supply chain issues. If the food isn't going to be available from Tripoli, it's how does it come in from Egypt? Can we open up the port here in Benghazi and start to leverage the port as an entry point for food aid and other critical items? So that's what we're doing now. We don't feel that the need to bring in items is apparent right at this moment, but we want to make sure that the infrastructure and the planning is in place if this becomes necessary.
Okay, Cassandra Nelson, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date there from Benghazi. Well, the reports of pro-Gaddafi forces attacking protesters, rebel groups in eastern Libya are preparing for battle. Al Jazeera's Jackie Rowland is there.
Well, we're on a ridge not far from the town of AlJazeera, which is pretty much the front line in this battle now against Muammar Gaddafi. The rebel forces are armed with really quite a mixture of equipment, some very old Soviet weapons, also some more modern stuff. The rebels themselves are a very mixed bag. Some who have former military experience, some who knew nothing at all about military matters as recently as a week ago, but have had a kind of crash course in fighting and in weaponry. Now, Gaddafi fighters have in recent days carried out sorties, bombing raids against rebels in this part of the east of the country, but no sorties at all today. Clearly because of the weather. We're in the middle of a sandstorm here and visibility is pretty poor. Those Gaddafi bombers have mostly missed their targets on recent days, even when there were clear skies, so the chance of them actually hitting anything in this kind of weather is pretty slim. But the fighters are still looking pretty undisciplined, don't appear to have a clear strategy about how to advance their fight against Muammar Gaddafi. But what we have noticed is them bringing weapons, heavy guns up the road and aiming them towards the west in the general direction from which they anticipate that Gaddafi forces may next come.
In Egypt, thousands of protesters have once again taken to the capital's Tahrir Square to call for swift political reform. The new Prime Minister, Essam Sharaf, turned out to address the crowds alongside a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. He vowed to work hard to realise protesters' demands, saying that he would step down immediately if he failed to do so.
You have achieved a great task, and the bigger objective is to rebuild Egypt. I'm praying to God that I would see Egypt a free country where opinion is not captured in prison cells, and see that the security of the citizen is a top priority. I pray to God that may Almighty God has honored me with more than I have asked for, and I pray to God to help me be able to deserve this position. Please raise your head up. You are an Egyptian.
We're joined now live by political activist Leila Swaif. She's a professor at Cairo University. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, did what he say satisfy the crowds there?
Yes, absolutely. Everyone is very glad that Professor Sharaf has been appointed. As far as himself is concerned, everyone is satisfied. It still remains to see what kind of a cabinet he manages to put together, and if he will actually manage to deliver on the rest of our demands.
So just
like the lifting of the emergency state and.
No, I was going to ask you to outline exactly what it is you're still aiming for.
Security apparatus. Well, the most urgent demands now are the lifting of the emergency state and the dismantling of the state security apparatus. For example, today I have been campaigning for a young man who was falsely accused of being a Baltagi and who was sentenced by military court to 5 years in prison in like 5 minutes. This could not happen if the emergency laws were lifted. So it really is urgent that the emergency laws be lifted as soon as possible. I think that's the appointment that we will be watching is who he appoints as his Minister of Interior, and whether it's someone who will be able to clean up the police, who will be able to get the police back on the streets without there being a repressive force.
Because at the moment you've got a problem with a lack of security, haven't you?
Absolutely, and this is because of this problem that many young men are being arrested, charged with being Baltageya, whether they are or not, and then, summary justice, military courts, where, each trial lasts like 10 minutes, and they're sentenced to very long sentences. This is a completely unacceptable position. We need security on the streets, but we also need justice in normal courts of law, and I think